Good evening, I'm Age.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're Adam reading Chapter 27, Empire and Expansion, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, want to start us off?
Gladly. Overall, immediately after the Civil War, Americans were still indifferent to the outside world. But several factors rendered America more ambitious and imperialistic than ever before. First, farmers and factory workers sought new markets. Second, yellow journalism portrayed imperialism as a manly adventure. Third, Americans interpreted Darwinism to mean that the strong nations should rule the world. Fourth, America developed a new steel navy. So now that America was an imperial power, James G. Blaine passed the Big Sister policy, which opened Latin American trading to America. And America also began to intervene in foreign affairs, since a number of diplomatic crises occurred, such as when Britain attempted to intervene in Venezuela after discovering gold in Venezuela. Secretary of State Richard Olney invoked the Monroe Doctrine against Britain, and although Britain initially rejected the assertion, they eventually submitted to America's demands. This period, when Britain attempted to cultivate friendly foreign affairs with America, is known as the Great Rapprochement. Now, Frank, could you tell me how Americans' imperialist clause extended into Hawaii?
I can indeed. Since the 1820s, Hawaii had been an area of interest to Americans, acting as a coaling station or place to spread Christianity. Trade began to increase with the island, and as its climate allowed for massive agriculture, trade began to spread. Unfortunately, the McKinley Tariff in 1890 raised the price of products being imported from Hawaii and made the cost of agriculture high. From the standpoint of the farmers, the best way to subvert this price increase would be for the U.S. to annex Hawaii, thus eliminating the side effects of the tariff. Therefore, in 1893, American farmers revolted against Queen Liliuokalani and asked President Cleveland for annexation. Unfortunately for them, the anti-expansionist Cleveland replied with a resounding no. But Abe, can you tell me where else American imperialism spread to next?
Of course. Cuban insurrectos wanted to rid their country of Spanish rule, so they burned cane fields and blew up trains. Very effective. Unfortunately, a Spanish general known as Butcher Whaler crushed the revolt. American yellow journalists such as Hearst and Pulitzer wrote sensationally of the atrocities in Cuba and infuriated the American public. Hostilities were further engendered when the American battleship Maine mysteriously blew up. Americans insisted that a Spanish submarine had torpedoed the battleship. Thus, a fervent war fever coursed through America's veins. President McKinley was nicknamed Wobbly Willie since he was so indecisive about whether to go to war with Spain or not. In the end, he submitted to the will of the American public and declared war on Spain in 1898. Congress also passed the Teller Amendment, which stipulated that Cubans would gain their freedom after Spanish rule had been eradicated. Now, Frank, how did the Spanish-American War spread?
Well, in 1898, Roosevelt commanded Commodore Dewey of the Hong Kong Fleet to attack Spanish positions in Manila in the Philippines, far away from Cuba. The Spanish fleet was mostly outdated wooden boats and withered under bombardment from the American Armada. Dewey managed to take out the entire fleet without a single American casualty, and after that, America launched a ground invasion in August, removing the islands from Spanish control. Only a few months later, the U.S. annexed Hawaii also. But Abe, how did U.S. forces eventually invade Cuba?
Well, the Spanish War began by sending a fleet of warships to Cuba. At the same time, the Americans sent an invading force under General William R. Shafter. A portion of Shafter's army was known as the Rough Riders and was comprised of Western cowboys and ex-convicts. Colonel Leonard Wood and Theodore Roosevelt both commanded the Rough Riders. Eventually, the American army triumphed over the Spanish and captured Santiago, a major Cuban city. The Americans also hastily captured Puerto Rico, meeting little resistance there. Spain signed an armistice in 1898, which ended the Spanish-American War. In the duration of the war, America had lost thousands of soldiers to disease and poisoning canned meat. Now, Frank, I noticed that in the title of the next section, there's a question mark. Could you tell me what Kennedy is confused about?
Absolutely. The title is America's Curse of Empire, and what Kennedy's implying is that there were mixed benefits and negatives resulting from the Spanish-American War. But first, let's go through how the war finally concluded. Through the peace deal with Spain, the US gained Guam, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. But because McKinley didn't want to appear imperialistic, he was unsure of how to proceed in regards to the Philippines. In the end, the US paid Spain $20 million for the islands. Now, the acquisition of the Philippines, an archipelago so far away from the American homeland, provoked outrage, and the Anti-Imperialist League brought people from all walks of life together in opposition to US expansion. Of course, there were two sides, and many supported American imperialism, claiming it would lead to civilizing missions in uncivilized countries. After William Jennings Bryan backed the treaty, the Senate agreed to have it passed. Abe, what steps did America take towards Puerto Rico, one of its newfound colonies?
All right, the first thing America did was passing the Foraker Act, which allowed Puerto Rico a small degree of popular government. Even though America was improving education, transportation, and sanitation in Puerto Rico, most Puerto Ricans still wanted their independence. In the insular cases, the Supreme Court decreed that the Constitution did not apply to Puerto Ricans, and thus Puerto Ricans did not possess full American rights. In Cuba, after General Leonard Wood and Colonel William Gorgas wiped out yellow fever, the U.S. honored the Teller Amendment and withdrew from Cuba. However, the Americans forced the Cubans to sign the Platt Amendment, which essentially brought Cuba back under American control. The amendment allowed American troops to freely intervene in Cuba and forced Cuba to promise, first, not to make treaties with other nations, and second, not to sell its naval stations. Now, Frank, how did the Spanish-American War end?
Well, since it lasted only 113 days, the Spanish-American War made America into a global power, since America had shown that it could fight and end battles quickly. And the war strengthened the country in more ways than simply the affirmation of America's military power. It also healed the divide between the North and the South, since both sides were fighting towards the same objective. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe,
and comment down below if you have any questions.
We'll catch you guys next time.